Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the JKWD podcast, where we are still in our homes. Kelvin, how are you? With your stay-at-home order these days?
Oh, I'm wonderful.
I love that you found virtual backgrounds on Zoom. You'll hear it when you go back to produce the episode, but I was talking to our guest Val Walker about this. I never know whether you're going to show up on the beach or in a big conference room or in space.
Well, I've always wanted to be a universal traveler, so this gives me the ability, at least in my head, or at least on my screen, But that sunset's kind of soothing.
Yeah,
got that bright thing around my head there, but it. And actually, I think I may have to go back and get my Onondaga Lake one. But my computer crashed after that particular. That's what happened. My computer crashed, so it took me a few days to get things off of it, so I could get back.
Yeah.
But we're back. But yeah. So there's more than one way to travel. I can do it in my head or on the screen, or when I get enough money to keep moving.
That's right.
How about you? What's going on in your world now?
Yeah, we're doing all right. The battle for getting outside a little bit continues. So, we've been taking 3-4 walks a day. We took a drive.
Awesome.
A few days ago.
I figured out the other day the drive's not too bad because you don't have to get out of the car. You don't have to bother nobody.
Well, we packed everybody. We packed the baby and the dog and the wife and the me, all in the van, and we went for a drive. And it was good to see that we weren't the only ones listening. We saw one person out running with their dog. We saw a family out walking together.
Mm-hmm.
We saw a couple of people out on their bikes, but we drove around for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost nobody. And I mean, you've been here, you know what it's like downtown.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So just a good reminder that everybody was going through this.
Oh yeah. And they actually mandated masks here for in the stores and stuff recently.
Oh good. Yeah.
Because the night before they did that, I was in a store around a corner. There's a couple of people in there, they were, I don't know, 1.5 feet from each other, one of which was a police officer. He had nothing. The other guy had a mask, but it was around his neck. And I'm like,
doing a lot of good there.
There you go. So, and then, the next day, they maybe the day after that, they mandated that if you're going to be in the store, have that mask on and stay away from people.
So we don't have that order here, but we've been doing this anyway. We went and got these these things from a fishing store online.
Uh-huh.
That they're like dust coverage for your face,
right?
So you can wear them. Ladies could wear them as a headband. Or guys could too if they had hair, not like me. But they go over your face and they could
Oh, really? I didn't find one of those.
Mouth and nose, and we got some of those. And I also got hooked up with. By the time this comes out, we'll have already started. But we started with a group called Local Farm Bag, which is like a CSA. They put together. Yeah, our bag will be about 17 pounds of produce and a loaf of bread every week. And, you can add on, they send out a list on Sunday about what's going to be in your bag, and you can substitute out, and they have add-ons available if you want a pound of sausage from a local farm or a pound of beef from a local farm. You can always add that on, and they'll just come deliver it on Wednesday.
Oh, nice.
Over here. So, Yeah, we got hooked up with them. So that's the one thing we've been really going to the grocery store a lot for is fresh stuff. Is you can't really keep salad in the freezer.
Not for long. Not for long.
Not at all, because it just once you take it out, the lettuce all wilts.
Turns weird. Yeah.
So we had a meat full of freezer. We had a freezer full of meat. We still have another week or so in there. So we'll deal with these guys for a while, and only go back to the grocery store for Pediasure and diapers for a while, and who knows? We'll have to run out for milk occasionally.
Well, I think they extended us to the middle of May or maybe the end of May. I don't watch news every day, so I have to check in. I got enough people talking about it that I don't have to keep it in my face. So,
as most of the world knows, we've mostly opened the state, but
stories.
The mayor here in Savannah has had a very public feud with the governor, and the governor's orders specifically overrule municipal orders, which is unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Much the way that a lot of federal orders allow states to do whatever they want, right, as long as they are not in direct conflict. A lot of governors will also do the same thing with municipalities. They'll say municipalities can basically do whatever they want as long as it's not in direct conflict with the state order. But here they don't allow that. The state order is the state order, and no municipality may make any other order unless it's basically worded the exact same.
Unless it's
worded basically the exact same.
Got it.
So our mayor's been on CNN and everything, battling with the governor. But a lot of businesses are, a lot of businesses here anyway in Savannah are siding with the mayor and saying, look, it's too early. There's not enough testing. We don't know what our liability is if somebody comes in here and gets sick. We're just going to keep doing what we're doing. Nobody wants to go share bowling balls. Nobody wants to go sit in a restaurant with other people right now. Just give it another little while.
Mm. Yeah, I've seen a lot of protests around the country. So, I haven't seen them. You know how it is. I get quick clips. I see the headlines, and they may be making bigger crowds than they really are. I don't know, but at the moment, the science is maybe we're not there yet. Yeah. But we'll see. So a little more. Well, I can't say a little more won't hurt because the things that are happening in the economy are happening in the economy.
Right.
But I'm not a.
So we'll see if that.
I'm not a guru there.
Yeah, we'll have to see if that changes the way we do things. Mm. But we have a guest today. Her name is Val Walker. She is author of 400 Friends and No One to Call. It came out at a very fortuitous time. It's really a book about isolation and the isolation that she and others were feeling. You'll hear her talk about having chronic illness and not really being able to go out much. And her friends really calling her and saying, hey, you should come out more instead of isolating, instead of going to her to find out what's wrong. And if you check your Facebook friends list and you check your LinkedIn connections and all that, how many people are you connected to and how many of those people would show up if you needed them? So this is really a discussion about having those real human connections. And Val does bring up the fact that we're all kind of quarantined with COVID happening right now. This wasn't on the radar when she wrote her book. So it just kind of got magnified. We're all at home hoping for any human connection, which a lot of us are getting through these weekly Zoom calls. Like Kelvin and I have been having for the last 5 years.
Has it been that long? Yeah.
We know how it goes.
Before that, it was just a choice. It wasn't like a necessity, right?
That's right. Well, I mean, it was a necessity because we just could not. I mean, we couldn't have lunch.
That's correct. It was. It is a long way to go for lunch.
That is a long way to go for lunch. I mean, even if I had a helicopter in my backyard, it'd still take 2.5 hours to get to you.
Yeah, just as quick, and I can eat what I want.
Yes. We don't have to decide on a restaurant again.
Exactly. Maybe again soon. Maybe sometime soon. Let's working on.
Yeah, well,
young yet.
Yes, that's true.
So
anyway, as usual, brought to you by our friends over at Kettle and Fire. Go try something new. Get some bone broth to make your own soup with, or just to sip on like tea. Get some soup. Their bone broths are grass-fed animals, and the bones. They slaughter the animals first. Well, they don't slaughter the animals. They get recently slaughtered animals. The bones of recently slaughtered animals, and they boil those bones for at least 10 hours with organic herbs and veggies to get the broth all delicious for you. They want to give you 10% off. kettleandfire.com. If you want that 10% off, use code BetterHumanhood when you go to checkout. It's Kettle and Fire, KETTLEANDFIRE.com, code BetterHumanhood at checkout for 10% off. And on the other side of the music, you will hear our conversation with Val. Podcast, where we talk about better humanhood and teach you how to dominate your world. You ready? Here we go. Val, welcome to the show. I think we're going to have you introduce yourself. We'll pull some stuff from your bio for the show intro, but we'll have you introduce yourself. Tell us your mission. Tell us why it's your mission, and then we'll go ahead and get into it.
Okay. Well, I knew back in 2012, after I had a very isolating experience, that at some point there was going to be a book about this. And it was really strong for me, having been a rehabilitation counselor and a case manager for people who had been a lot more isolated than I was, people who had really severe mental illness, people who had been homeless, people who had other kinds of really serious illness. I had seen people so marginalized, and part of my job for a good 20 years had been how to connect marginalized people into the fabric of society, to feel like they're a, contributing member of society, whether I found them jobs or I helped them find classes or groups to join or volunteer activities to join. Many of the people I represented as a counselor had even been shunned in different ways from their own families, or just not understood, basically never fitting in. So I had been the diva, for 20 years, support groups, helping people get connected and feel more valuable in their communities, right? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden in 2012, I'm left stranded in a hospital bed when two of my closest friends didn't show up. They sent me a text message and said, sorry, we had a family emergency. Little did I know at the time, their lives were ravaged by a family member with an opioid addiction.
Oof.
And, the story goes on. I eventually forgave this friend who didn't show up, and I began to understand she had been more isolated than I was, and that her reason for not showing up was a common problem across the whole country in this epidemic of loneliness and isolation, that when people are really, really isolated by life situations that are really beyond their control, like addiction, or like there are many great forces that isolate people. And in my case, I was isolated partly by my chronic illness with colitis, inflammatory bowel disease that causes a lot of problems for people with Crohn's disease, colitis disease. And I noticed that there are groups of people all around that are just as isolated as some of the marginalized people I had represented for 20 years. So I began going, gosh, we really are. This is really an epidemic. There are a lot of people who don't have people they can call when there's real serious crisis or need in their lives. They're just, well, you can have 400 friends and no one to call. And I went, geez, I'm going to name a book after that. 400 friends and no one to call. That you can have all these connections and you can work a whole decades and decades of a career and be well connected. But who the hell is going to show up for you if you get stuck in a hospital? Who can you really count on? So thank you for hearing my introduction. I wanted to write a book that I had never seen out there. All these social scientists were writing books on loneliness and isolation and that it was an epidemic, but I hadn't seen a book that came from a first-hand experience where I could wear my hat of being a counselor, but also wear the hat of being somebody dumped in the hospital, and feeling lonely and scared. And then I found 15 other people to also contribute to the book and tell their stories of isolation. And we put together a beautiful book of my story and 15 other people's stories, mixed with some really practical suggestions on how to break out of isolation. And then, of course, I wanted to write about all the studies, all the social science studies and the statistics, so that people could open their eyes and go, oh my God, look how pervasive this problem is, so that you stop blaming yourself and realize this is happening to just about everybody. So thanks for my introduction.
Now, without giving away too much of the book, what are some of the stats that stuck out at you? I mean, I for one am a numbers guy, so
yeah, numbers really talk, and there's really a great deal of research. Let me first cite some of the best huge studies on this. The AARP Connect to Effect studies that have gone on for 12 years. I started reading the first ones back in 2012. I began finding that adults over 50 have been studied very closely on patterns that make them lonely. And some of the forces for people over 50 include people who live alone, that 1 out of 3 people over 60 live alone, and 1 out of 4 Americans under 60 live alone. I thought that's a lot of people who live alone. So that was one force. Also, a lot of people are full-time caregivers, meaning they're taking care of elders who are sick, they're in their family, or kids with disabilities. A lot of people who are full-time caregivers, they're one of the most isolated groups of all, and that's across the age span. Other isolated groups that AARP was pointing out, socioeconomic. If you don't have financial stability, if you're caught up in survival mode financially, juggling a lot of jobs or whatever, you're also going to be more isolated because you put your whole social life on the back burner when you've taken care of stuff. Those are some of the groups that show isolation, but especially people who have mobility and physical disabilities and cognitive disabilities. So if you're a group of people that is disabled in certain ways, you're also one of the most isolated, according to all these studies. So I connected a lot of dots: National Institute of Health, CIGNA studies, Pew Research studies. They were all chiming in. Here's a big one. 2 out of 5 Americans admit they have no one to talk to when they're going through a hard time. Nobody to confide in. 2 out of 5 Americans. 3 out of 5 Americans say that there's nobody to talk to about meaningful, really serious, meaningful stuff. That I feel like there's really nobody to talk to about anything deep and meaningful on a regular basis. Okay? So there's a lack of meaningful conversation out there. There's a lack of feeling you can confide and open up to people out there. That makes you really lonely. There's also a lot of research to show that social media has a way of fragmenting and distracting us from having conversations and face-to-face encounters. Of course, this is pre-COVID-19. But a lot of us were feeling lonely because it's like, geez, I only get a few minutes into a conversation and then there's an interruption. I don't have time to get into anything with anybody in any real substantial, meaningful way. So conversation has been disappearing, according to all this research. I could loosely say that. If not changing, conversation has been so interrupted and distracted with the advent of social media and everybody on their phones so much that a lot of people have kind of given up trying to have a good old heart-to-heart with somebody. It's like, when do I get a chance to really talk about anything really serious with anybody? That makes you feel really lonely and misunderstood. So those are some of we're 3 times more likely not to have somebody to talk to than we were in 1985. Threefold increase with surveys where people say they have somebody to talk to, somebody to confide in since 1985. I hope those are a few eye-awakened things.
Yeah. So, I mean, 2 things have kind of struck me over the past couple of years. One was a study I read somewhere, and I don't know where, but in long-time couples, if the male dies, the woman will often get involved further in any communities she's been involved in, whether that be a sewing club or a reading club or a sisterhood at a synagogue or church. But if the woman dies, the man's dead in a few months, because particularly men don't have groups. They peg their identity to work and protectorship throughout their lives, and don't get involved in anything. So they've got nothing left when their family is gone. The other thing was a personal anecdote. We moved into this house almost 2 years ago. Calvin came down to visit, and we had a housewarming. And we went around and we put an invitation in everybody's mailbox on the street. It's a dead-end street. There are 30 houses, 32 houses. So some of them will come, some of them won't, whatever. We drop them in, come meet your neighbors. And maybe 4 or 5 neighbors showed up. They're like, wow, thank you so much for inviting us. And then over the next couple of weeks, we had people come and knock on our doors. Hey, I'm sorry I couldn't make it. I was so surprised to get your invitation. Why were you surprised? Like, I'm going to invite my friends and block up your street like I'm the new guy? Like, I want to know my neighbors, and I knew my neighbors. I'm walking the dog, we're walking with the baby, and we, I know, I think of the 32 houses, I think there are 5 or 6. I wouldn't recognize them by face if they were out in the street, but I recognize their cars coming up and down.
Yeah.
And it's just so strange that, like, most people don't know those people right there and like her right there,
That's right. That's right. There's a myth that I wanted to bust in this book. Like, I'm trying to chime into what you just said. We think we have to only build our friendships and networks through just our tribe, our common interests, the folks who we call like-minded, And of course, social media builds all of our connections around your common interests,
Sure.
Right? And it's safe, to talk about stuff you have in common. It's much easier than it is to talk to people, who might just be sitting right across from you, This is pre-COVID-19 now. So I'm trying to set up why we're even lonelier now with COVID.
Yeah.
But, it was much, much easier to have, a solid, streamlined way to relate to people. And online and through your phones and whatnot, you had these very formatted ways you could connect with people instead of the good old-fashioned way where you look and chat with somebody. Just look up and chat. How's it going? Casual conversation has been disappearing. And indeed, millennials and younger Generation Z admit that they're awkward and avoidant of casual, happenstance conversation. They're less in practice with it. Now, I'm not going to judge that, but a wonderful social scientist writes a lot about millennials, especially Generation Z, and she writes about the anxiety that young people feel at just chatting with people face to face in a natural setting, that they have to have these props, to connect through texting or, set up through our phones and social media, that just a casual conversation is really scary. And Jean Twenge is it's spelled Twenge. I just want to put it out there. She's done great research. So back to what you were saying, Josh, especially if you're under 30 years old now, it's harder for people to just kind of, in a more happenstance, casual way, connect with neighbors and be in the moment with people, that we're more used to using our props to, we just feel so much safer. It's just easier to know for sure, okay, on that Facebook group or on that Instagram pictures and stuff, you've got something really solid to connect with. God forbid, it's just that you're another human being who just felt like chatting with you. God forbid. I just want to meet you because you're my neighbor, or you happen to just, be at this place and time. I write a lot in my book about loving where you live, and that, when you feel connected to your community as a base, where you are physically, where you live, in your town, in your city, loving the space, loving the parks, loving the vibe, that opens up people to connecting that we've almost forgotten about. A sense of place is more important, really, than trying to find your tribe. In other words, trying to find your tribe doesn't always work. It's better, in a way, to create an opportunity to connect with people rather than try to find an opportunity. And I'm going on now about that, but the point is if you're
That's
trying
okay,
to fit in somewhere. Yeah.
That's okay. It's your book.
Yeah, but I didn't mean to give a lecture too much on it. But we think we have to fit into a group. We think we have to find our tribe. We think we have to find the right person to date, the right person, swipe through this and that, through Tinder, and, find we're looking for the right person out there. That's the way our society has us thinking now. And I'm saying that is actually ass backwards. It needs to be the other way around, where you create the opportunities and you create the community by putting out there something you want to share with others and create it around people's interests that way. It's better to host your own watch party. It's better to get out there and create your own meetup. It's better to get out there and start a book club, or, a dog walking club, or put it out there like that, rather than just try to fit in. You have a better chance of building community when you create it. Now, that doesn't mean you don't go to things other people have created, but the difference is that when you go to things, you don't go just to find your best friend or your next person you're going to date. You go because of the activity itself and enjoying it as an experience, not to find the right person. You go somewhere to share an experience, not try to, look for the right person. I hope that makes sense. Community building means sharing experiences, not trying to find the right person for you. That just really puts you in like a tunnel vision.
Right. Yeah, there's a scene in one of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. Yeah, these are films that Disney put together based on a theme park ride. But all the pirate lords come together, and they're battling a common enemy, and the only problem they've ever had is that in order to get anything accomplished, they have to elect the pirate king, and everybody always votes for themselves. So it's always a 9-way tie.
Yeah.
And this time they elect somebody on two of them get together and vote for one person. But the problem with everybody just starting a community and not going to anybody else's is that now you've got 9 people in 9 different communities.
Yeah.
I got my community here, and you've got your community there, and you've got your community there, and we all have our little community with nobody in it.
With nobody in it. Yeah. Is that what it sounded like I was saying? I was more saying
that's
opportunities, not the people.
I was going to say
you're not trying to fit in and find the right person or right group. If you interact in somebody else's group, go for the experience, not to find your best friend.
Gotcha.
Go for the shared experience, and over the months, and it takes months or years, usually years, to build relationships with people. The big myth too is that we think it's supposed to happen fast just because we're on social media, but it takes many months, if not years, to build solid relationships with people. And that's what bothers me, is that we're so damn impatient and we get frustrated so quickly because that person doesn't quite fit what we want in our lives, And sometimes we can be surprised who's not in your tribe that you build a relationship with. So let's don't skip over all these possibilities. So building community is, of course, sharing other people's groups, but sometimes you find people, sometimes there is a need for something that's new too. But I agree with you that there's so many groups to pick from.
Yeah. Well, and I think another thing that you've kind of alluded to is, having these props, having our phones. A lot of people are trying to build those relationships through texts and that kind of thing, and they're missing out on 80%, 90% of our actual communication, which is nonverbal. Yeah, and so we never actually know what that other person is thinking. We just kind of get their words.
Right. And during COVID-19, yes, thank goodness we have screens and we have technology, and that's better than nothing at all. So I'm actually singing the praises of Zoom and Skype and all our FaceTime and everything. I'm really glad we can use that for now. And people are using it mostly pretty creatively. Necessity is the mother of invention. So I like a lot of the creative stuff that's going on with people getting together in different ways, having family reunions or holidays, I'm all for that. Let's just hope that during this time of COVID that we can build the 2 big opportunities we have during COVID. One is that we do have longer, more heartfelt conversations. Mm-hmm. Whereas pre-COVID, we were, like I was telling you, we were too interrupted and fragmented in our conversations, and people felt like they didn't matter very much because it's like, you just couldn't get into anything very deeply with people sometimes, Mm-hmm. So deeper conversations, talking more from the heart, having more, even on screen, when you see each other, that mm-hmm. soul to soul connection through your eyes, all of that. There's potential there to tell our stories in a more deep way, to have better conversations, more meaningful conversations during COVID. Number 2 is the whole idea that we can actually expand our communities. And one way is we can use this time to actually build community, even if we can't see people face to face. One is tapping the people from your life 10, 20, 30 years ago that used to be connections for you. This is a great time to go through your closet or something, find the old, address books, Rolodexes, pre-90s maybe. It depends on how long you've been on the planet. But there may be contacts from high school, from college, from your great aunt. You've got an aunt out there in her 80s across the country who might be wonderful to talk to. Mm-hmm. Old friends from God knows when. And this rediscovery of our past long lost connections can actually open up a whole new world to build, extend your community and build community. I really advise tapping into your past connections, because in our world pre-COVID, we had left them in the dust. A lot of people we'd moved on from 10, 20, 30 years ago. But right now is a great time to rediscover who's still in your life.
Yeah.
So those are two big ways right now we can deepen our relationships, go back to the old ones, or have better conversations with the ones around us now that there hopefully is a little more time on everybody's hands. Everybody's bored, a little more bored, that there's time to really get into stuff more with, what we were overlooking.
This is, I'm a talker.
Good.
But I find myself listening in this one, like intentionally, not just because, Josh won't let me, but he had to laugh at that, right? Because I hadn't thought of a lot of this. Now I've seen the people with the, the social media and the flip the phones and stuff. I do that too, but I can have a really long conversation on a I used to be on Twitter. What we could do in 140 characters is amazing. I can't have long text conversations with Josh. He gets fed up with that really fast. So, but he and I can talk. We meet each other here on the podcast once a week anyway. And if we get together and there's nothing we want to pocket, we still talk. We started out as friends here. He moved there. We kept the friendship going, and that's been awesome. Generally speaking, most people will tell you that I could probably have a conversation with a tree. Mm-hmm. So talking is not
Is there a video of that?
Not that I would release. Actually, you know what? That might be a good idea for my next podcast. But a lot of that I hadn't thought about. I had a guy. You talk about reaching out to people who you're used to. I used to be fairly prolific on Twitter. And I had a guy that I hadn't talked to in a couple of years, tweeted or anything, called me like 3 weeks ago. And I got to call him back because I told him I'd call him and we'd do a podcast. But just out of the blue, and strangely enough, I still had this guy's number on my phone. So when he called my phone, his name popped up and I'm like, I wonder if this is a spam of some kind. I picked it up and it was him, and it was a great conversation. Yeah. So I understand how that's going.
But it makes a lot of people feel lonely. Let's say you haven't seen a friend. You haven't seen a friend for almost a year. Yeah. Somebody you really want to catch up with, and you go out to a nice restaurant. This is pre-COVID. Okay. You meet. You're so excited. You got 2 whole hours for a nice power lunch. I was all excited. I mean, I wrote about this in my book. People, 83% of women over 45 years old on the Pew Research study says it pisses them off when they're looking forward to seeing somebody they haven't seen in a long time. Damn if she doesn't get on her phone after 5 minutes. We start to warm up and get caught up, and there's damn son is calling or something, or got a text back to some. Damn it, get off the thing. Stay, let's have at least an hour. I haven't seen you in a year. People get really upset more than they let on. And why I like doing all this research was, how lonely are these phones really making us? How much is conversation disappearing? I want to cite a wonderful MIT researcher I quote the heck out of. Her name is Sherry Turkle. Turkle, Turkle. She's done all this research on how just having a phone sitting on the table, if you're eating with somebody, is going to pretty much ruin. I mean, just put the damn thing away. Don't even have it in sight. At least for 45-year-olds and older women were saying how much it upset them. But they also studied across the sexes. Men were less bothered by that, but they were still significantly bothered by more like 60%. It affected men too.
That's still a lot.
So that's a real huge generalization. But according to the Pew Research studies on feeling like these gadgets and devices are messing with our good quality time. But things are changing with COVID, though, because I really think, I'm not going to say absence makes the heart grow fonder. It's like, I'd give anything to hug that person and sit down with them for an hour uninterrupted right now. Maybe COVID's making us a little more appreciative of our FaceTime, but I don't want to sound Pollyanna-ish, because COVID is really affecting us badly, who are already lonely and isolated. It's magnifying that. But I just wanted to put it out there. All the gadgets and social media really can help us to some extent as a tool. Don't get me wrong. Helps us navigate through communities. It is a great tool, and it sure is right now during COVID. But let's hope that post-COVID, we're going to value that FaceTime that we have in real time a little more.
Yeah, well, and you said it correctly. It's a tool, right?
Yeah, it's an important.
And you have to use a tool correctly.
Right.
If you have a hammer, you can build a house, or you can bash somebody on the head. Those are two very different things that you can do with a hammer.
Amen.
It's a tool. You have to use your tools correctly in order to get the best out of them. I do hope that
when we first got on Twitter, that was awesome, because it allowed us to meet people we didn't know.
Right.
And we would get together.
Right.
Well, we were lucky where we were in Syracuse that the business community and the higher ed community were so far behind in getting on it that we had 2-3 years to ourselves, where some of the small businesses were getting on it, mostly because we were showing up to coffee shops. Wait, you're bringing 20 people? Okay. Where did you all meet?
Yeah.
Can
I just add something that the people who are most vulnerable, about those most dependent on social media pre-COVID, much research showed that it wasn't so much the social media that was making us lonelier necessarily. What it was doing was taking the people who already were lonely and isolated and making them even more lonely and isolated. So the most vulnerable people, the ones who admitted that they felt left out, lonely, like they didn't fit in, they were more likely to get dependent on social media. People who already believed they were isolated and already admitted. Lots of research shows that social media made the lonelier people even lonelier. However, people who had a pretty strong support system face-to-face as a balance weren't as touched by social media. In other words, if somebody unfriended you, it was like, F it all. I've still got these other friends to see, and we're going to hang out. And they love me anyway. They've known me since I was 5 years old. They're going to love me anyway. But the people who didn't have those people in their lives, who loved them anyway, that, like I said, the people who didn't have that confidential person they could hang out with and talk to about anything. If you didn't have that kind of connection in your life, you were far more susceptible to go downhill, getting way too dependent on social media, comparing yourself to everybody all over the place. I talk about the 3 S's that make us feel lonelier when we're missing real connection in our life. One is stigma. We feel ashamed of being lonely. We feel ashamed of saying there's nobody around to call. There's huge shame and stigma around that. Then there's also status. If you're feeling that you're less than others, inferior to others in any way out there, even if it's society telling you that you're not making as much money as your friends, your other friends are going on vacations, you can't get out of state, you can't even get across town, yeah. You've got all these friends who seem to do so much better than you, they've got it more together than you. And we know that half of it's BS all over social media anyway, but you're more prone to feeling bad if you're lonely anyway when you compare yourself with those so-called friends. So the combination of the status, the shame, and the stigma, the three S's, can really make you much, much more lonely. And there was a great social scientist named John Cacioppo. He only died very recently, but he had brilliant research that showed the people who tend to be more sensitive to what other people think of them, who've often been very hurt and pushed away, rejected, or even abused by others, are more likely to be sensitive to like the slightest little, shunning, they don't have the same wherewithal and resilience to people saying, that they're more sensitive to what people think of them, are far more likely to be lonely. It's amazing when you feel more vulnerable to what people think of you and you can't handle the slights and the dumb stuff people do. Pretty much you basically you have a harder time kind of being more kind of bouncing along with what people do, if that makes sense. You don't take the slights and the knocks as easily. So there's a lot of study on how oversensitive, and don't get me wrong, by oversensitive, it doesn't always mean that you show those feelings, but it makes you avoid others because I don't want to be hurt again. People are too hard for me. So there's a whole group of people out there that already have been hurt so much by human connection, they do avoid, and they're the ones who are far more at risk right now during COVID, because they're not going to be the ones to reach out and have the courage to take the risk in case nobody calls them back or doesn't respond. See what I'm saying?
Yeah. So there are two groups that I wanted to ask you about. They're very different groups. One, you talked about stigma, and during your introduction, you said that one of the friends who didn't show up was dealing with an opioid addiction in her family. Now, I've had this discussion with people, and we can kind of leave the political thing off the table, but it usually comes up in the context of in the context of political speech. I usually say, like, I don't think you should sit around doing heroin on your couch all day, but I don't think the government should stop you from doing it. And one of the reasons that I often cite is shame and stigma. Like, you're doing something illegal, so you have to hide it, and you have to hide it from your friend. You have to hide it from the people who are most likely to help you. And heroin is not the only opioid out there. Obviously, it's actually an opiate, right? Because it's natural. But even the synthetic crisis that we're dealing with, everything is full of shame. So you're not telling anybody.
That's right.
At least if you have people coming over to your house, they can see you're a little off. They sneak into the bathroom, check the medicine cabinet if you've got really good perceptive friends. But now nobody's doing that. And, everybody seems a little off when you're talking on Zoom, because everybody's a little like, what is this thing? Why am I staring at the screen again? I really wish I could have. So you can't tell if what's changed is just this general fear around around the coronavirus, or if it's or if it's really something wrong. The other group I want to ask about is people are on the wrong side of the digital divide. I mean,
Yeah.
I live in a fairly poor community. Well, at least a mixed economic community. We have lots of people who get all their computer access to the library. The library's been closed for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
They're not doing this. They're not sitting on Zoom looking at each other. They can't.
Right.
They've lost that access. I don't know. I don't know where these people are right now, or
Right.
what they're doing, or how they're coping mentally with this.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to cite two things: socioeconomic factors that isolate us, and that's across, especially, I've looked at all kinds of marginalized groups: racial differences, class differences, differences if you're LGBTQ, differences in the groups where, let me just put it this way, money in the United States is a great divider, and it really does isolate us. It causes the stigma and the status, the shame in a lot of ways. I write very openly in my book, as a woman really struggling financially. I lost my job in Maine. I ended up having to move to Boston, and it's a little long sad story of my car breaking down, my job's lost. I got to start all over. I think what I'm trying to say is, in the United States, because we don't have a safety net, it's more to the individual, that whole pull yourself up the bootstraps. And I want to really emphasize that creates, that's a huge factor in creating isolation. And that plays off of our shame. And you add in the addiction, you add in a mental health diagnosis, you add in stuff just with your reputation, maybe you got fired or something. I guess what I'm trying to say is, in the United States, money plays a bigger role than in other highly industrialized countries, in isolating us. And there's plenty of evidence. A lot of social scientists study that. And why I'm going down that road is looking at COVID-19 and how the people who are more affected by this disease showing up and dying from this disease are the poorer paid people, or poorer people, and people of color too. I, for one, lost a lot of my business with COVID. And my little story is, I went into a nursing home to work 1 or 2 days a week per diem with seniors, because I felt I used to teach seniors. I'm good with seniors, much older than me. And I just want you to know something, that a lot of the people I worked with were far more exposed to getting COVID, just like me. And I saw like a whole other world of people who were doing the essential work, who were actually, if you like, being paid really, really low. And we could talk about that. But what I'm trying to emphasize is how isolated, even on their jobs, they felt. And they didn't have the power to get tested for COVID. They didn't have the power to put the right PPE on. In my case, I didn't either. I didn't have the power to get tested or put PPE on. And at one point, I did get exposed. I won't get into the nitty gritty of the story, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, people who have support financially, people who can stay at home and work remotely during COVID, people who can get on Zoom and have reunions with their families and hang out with a bunch of people. There's so many of us that don't have that.
Right.
And I've worked closely with people who don't have that. And by the grace of God, I have maybe a little more than they do, but I still struggle as a woman on my own with no kids, no family, no husband. I mean, no family around. Right.
Right.
So the isolating forces in the U.S. around money, race, class, I guess I just want to say, it's the elephant in the room that you can't get around. Can I just put that out there, that in spite of that, people still do an amazing job of building their friendships and connections and safety nets in spite of that. And it's, to me, a miracle in the U.S. that people who are poorer are still able to have thriving, solid, healthy relationships with others in spite of those forces. So, but COVID right now, God knows, there is studies showing that there is more likely to be relapses with people who have addictions. Mm-hmm. More drinking is going on. More domestic violence is coming up. All the cracks in our social fabric in our society are showing up now more, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of mentions that it's not so much creating a lot of new problems as really emphasizing problems that we hadn't noticed before.
That's right. It's really bringing it to everybody's attention big time. Finally, essential workers who are paid like crap now we're calling them heroes. Well, I have mixed feelings about that, being heroes all of a sudden, like, Jesus, where the hell were you? I've had jobs that were low paying and I was treated like shit. So, crap, excuse me, this is a nice show. I can speak from different sides of the tracks, even as a white woman. I mean, I'm just saying, I think I have a little more compassion than a lot of people who have, are just socioeconomically, they just, I hope people are really appreciating how lucky they are.
Well, and a hero designation might give you a little ego boost or a little, a little happy in your heart. But, does that mean that when things get back to normal, whatever the new normal is going to be, people can't see my air quotes on the audio, whatever our new normal is going to be, is that going to translate to an increased wage?
Yeah,
probably not. In the same way that, the same way that some people were called to serve, in our military after 9/11, are people going to be called to serve, as doctors and nurses and first responders after this is all over? And does that flood the market and cheapen the labor even more?
But I will say this, at least in some ways, we all have a good excuse to say, hey, if I can't pay my rent or I can't pay my bills, back in 2012 when I couldn't pay my rent, I practically was evicted. I wasn't really evicted, but boy, did I have to get out of there fast.
Yeah.
I know what it feels like to feel ashamed because I couldn't, I had a lot of people judge me for not planning I made poor choices with my life, I know how it feels to be judged, shamed, stigmatized by not being able to make the rent and having to move on. And that said, right now, most Americans have far more compassion and are less judgmental if you can't pay your rent right now. And in some ways, even though I say this is exaggerated and magnified to people who are the have-nots, in some ways, it's given a greater sense of we're all in this together. So, I feel less shame and stigma with my, and I notice a lot of other peers of mine who struggled on their own, who've had financial dips, are admitting that at least we have a good excuse now and nobody's going to jump on your back if you can't keep your life going smooth right now. But there was a lot of judgment and shame on me in my life. And people said, Val, why are you isolating yourself so much? You need to get out more. Well, first of all, I didn't have money to put in my car to get down the street. Number two, I couldn't go out for McDonald's, let alone sushi with you guys. Mm-hmm. Number three, I had chronic colitis and I was homesick, and when I'm going to put it, everybody knows you got to have a toilet nearby when you got that thing. And when you have flare-ups, you just can't go out and socialize with that. And it makes you really, really tired and washed out. So a lot of people with Crohn's or colitis disease, they can't go out as often as they'd like. So I had illness,
And it's hard
all of
to,
that. So,
and
but
it's hard
people blamed
to
me for
call,
being
yeah.
isolated back then.
And it's hard to call people and say, hey, I would love to go out with you. I just can't. How about you come over?
Say that again?
So it's really hard sometimes to answer that and say, like, I can't come out right now, but why don't you come over for tea?
Yeah.
Yeah, because what a lot of people want to do is they want to have you out and celebrating life, and they don't really want to know what's going on.
Thank you. And I after I had to get out of my stuck situation in 2012 and I moved to Boston and I started building new friends, I had a whole different sense of the kinds of people I was, trying to attract. But for one thing, I became less ashamed and more of an advocate. You see, what changed in me was compassion and advocacy. In other words, the counselor I used to be for my marginalized folks, I learned to be that for myself. And that's why I wrote that book. It was like, Val, you're the compassionate advocate now for the folks who don't have money, for the folks who are left behind, the folks dealing with FOMO, for all the folks that feel like they can't measure up or keep up, with whatever is successful that made you feel isolated. So I wanted a book where I could be for myself and internalize all of that I had done as an advocate for marginalized people. I became one. And indeed, my book encourages people to say, let's be compassionate. Let's be self-compassionate. Let's advocate instead of feeling the shame. And same goes with COVID-19. If you have to go to a food pantry or you have to do something to take care of these needs, we can hold our head up with dignity and say, I'm advocating, I have nothing to be ashamed of here. But damn, I wish I felt that way back in 2012 when I all but crawled into Mass. I went to Mass. I told everybody I moved to Mass to save my ass. And it did. It took 6 years, though. I had to build up a whole new bunch of communities, and my book chronicles that. But I think a lot of it applies to now. It's getting past the stigma, the shame, the status, and just saying, okay, I'm going to be an advocate. This is our post-COVID world here, and speak up, speak out. Let's build community. Let's get through this together. Hopefully there's a unifying cry. A big message in my book was what isolates you can be turned into a force to unite you and galvanize you. So when you find people who are isolated and bothered by the same things you are, they're the first ones to connect with and build community around, and finding causes and missions, and a sense of purpose together. So that said, that's why when I went to support groups back in 2013, after I first came to Boston and hung out with people who were dealing with the same isolating forces as me, having that disease, having colitis or Crohn's disease, they had so many common experiences with me. It was easier to start making friends with them because they were isolated by the same kinds of things. Likewise, during COVID, if we find groups like frustrated parents who are going nuts, a lot of moms busy, they're looking for each other somewhere, even if they're doing Facebook chats or whatever. So what isolates us can be a force to unite us. So I'm very hopeful in some ways about what COVID's doing to us. Plus, we have no reason to feel ashamed right now. It's not through the fault of us ourselves. It's some force bigger. Thanks for letting me go on about that. I've been very bothered, very mad and hurt. I had to write that book to get out of that shaming and blaming that people said, Val, you were isolating yourself. No, I wasn't. I was not. You guys just didn't, A lot of the things that people say or blame you and shame you for isolating yourself, I'm sorry, but it's because in a lot of ways there were forces in my life, like illness, not having money, losing a job. Those forces isolate us. So stop blaming yourself, shaming yourself.
Well, I was going to ask you a couple of seconds ago.
Check on your friends if you haven't heard from them.
Oh.
A lot of my friends I've rediscovered, even the friends that, didn't show up. I found out one of my friends had a stroke. And part of the reason she disappeared off the radar for a while, I thought it's because she didn't like me anymore. Where were you for the last 2 years? I found out she had a stroke, and it wasn't too severe that it caused her not to be able to hang out and talk to me again. But it was a kind of like it was a beautiful experience in a way to reconnect with her and forgive her. Of course, she felt really bad about that experience when she couldn't show up for me. She had a really good reason not to show up. I understood it, but I realized that there are people who disappear from you or don't show up for you. And it was a beautiful part of my book to have a more forgiving attitude and more acceptance for people who don't show up for you, and realize we're all suffering isolation together.
So I was going to ask you a couple of minutes ago, and the answer is probably really clear, but sometimes you just got to hit me over the head with a book. When you were writing the book, who are you writing the book for?
For people who had been judged for having a mental illness, people who had been judged for isolating too much, so-called, people who had been judged who had invisible diseases like me. You don't know that I have colitis. You don't know how much it makes me tired and messes with my life. There are a lot of us walking around with invisible illnesses, we don't see. So I wanted a book. It was for me, but it was actually far more. I thought by opening up my story and profiling 15 other people, let's get that story told out there about why we were isolated, how much of it was inside of us, how much of it was outside as societal forces. Let's look at the interaction between your inner reaction to that and the societal forces isolating you, and how did these people break out? So the book really was, I chimed in with 15 other people's stories. I have people isolated from addiction in the book. I have people isolated from grief and loss of a loved one in the book. I have people isolated by horrible chronic illnesses in the book. I have people isolated just for being different in the book. I have LGBTQ lady in there isolated as a single lesbian in the book. I mean, I've got profiles of people from all different walks of life. And so the book really was our story of what it took to break out of that isolation. So when I wrote that book, I was in good company, and I damn well wasn't going to write just a little memoir for my sorry little ass. I made sure that I had 15 other people coming from all different backgrounds telling really a lot of the same common truths. So you have to be in it for the long haul. If you want to break out of isolation, you don't just join the right Facebook group or swipe through something on Tinder and suddenly your life is changed and poof, you're not lonely and isolated anymore. It does take many years for most of us to build out of isolation. So you got to be in it for the long haul if you seriously want to rebuild your life out of isolation. Not a quick fix. So I wanted a book that it would at least encourage you while you're pushing through all those societal forces. And, I wanted a book that was really realistic about what you're getting into. You don't just solve your problems by joining a club. You've been I was also tired of people handing out the answer. You just need to get out more. Oh, there was so much more to it. First of all, we needed at least one good person we could talk to and admit we were lonely to, and admit we had given up on getting out again because we were afraid of getting rejected, or it wasn't worth all the effort to go out and then nothing happened. So, you know, so thank you, Kelvin. I just wanted to answer for you. If it was only about me, I wouldn't have written a book. You know, it had to be all these other people alongside me, and thinking of all the people who had been shunned and judged, who had been on my caseload for 20 years just because, you know, one thing or another, because I got sick and tired of everybody going, you guys isolate yourself too much. Well, there were reasons.
Yeah, well, my point was I figured when you were writing it, you know, there was a multiple purpose there. So, but it's first for the person who was affected, the person who has the
It was
feelings you're
really
talking
healing to write it, Kelvin.
And then,
It was truly a great experience writing myself out of this major pity party of my life. Back in 2012, I wrote my way out, but, you know, I needed a lot.
and there's enough information in it for researchers and practitioners and people who want to actually create these communities again.
Yeah.
To chime in and help and understand what people are going through. So
the book is kind of a three-way punch. Part of it is stories of isolation so people can find relatable experiences. The second part of the book includes social science research, so you can see how, you know, really look at research to show what works and what helps, as well as who's out there that's isolated and why we're isolated. So the research in the book is important. I kind of put it in little sections so that it doesn't interrupt the stories, you know. And then I have a little toolkit in the book based on everybody's advice, and having been a counselor and helped other people build community, I boiled down the most important ways we can build community and made a nice little useful toolkit. So it's got the handbook, the toolkit, and the stories and the social science, so that one way or another somebody can get something out of it.
Cool. Sounds complete.
Yeah, but it kind of reinforces each other, because all that social science helped me feel more compassionate about myself, saying, Val, you're not the only one who's stranded in a hospital with nobody to pick them up. This is happening to lots of people. You know, it was helpful for me to stop blaming myself for it and find out that this is a societal problem. So the social science was comforting, believe it or not, for me. But hopefully it'll be comforting to other people who are being really hard on themselves, blaming themselves for being too isolating.
Excellent. So, Josh, what are you thinking over there?
No, I was thinking that, yeah, we're getting to that part of the conversation where we ask, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about that we haven't gotten to today? And we'll, of course, after that, ask you, where you hang out on the web, where people can find you. But anything else that you wanted to highlight that we...
Well, I just want to drive home what all the social science research says, and my own experience, and my 2 cents on the best ways to stay connected and build community during the COVID, during social distancing. One is, remember, it's only physical distancing. It's not really social distancing.
Right.
We have enormous ways we can build community even while we're stuck at home. Like I said, find those long lost people in your life and connect. Make a list of people to touch base with, check in with on a daily basis. Some people say have like a list where you kind of rotate people to check in with them. It really is good to check in with people who might be, like I said, a 20-year-old who's not a chitty chatty kind of person, who's been used to, let's say, was going to classes, and all their college has been suddenly, they're working from home or whatever, trying to finish school and all. A lot of 20-somethings are very isolated right now. So reach out to them as much as those seniors who don't use Skype and Zoom and don't have the technology, just by calling on the phone. Really important to reach out to people who might be more isolated than you during COVID. Really, and I mean like regular and often. Like even if it's just a 10 or 15-minute phone call, just like a check-in once or twice a week or something. I really recommend that. Also, find a person you can relate to yourself for your own support, to have somebody to talk to. Hopefully there's somebody in your circle or somebody you knew in the past that you can talk to really openly and honestly, even with your feelings. Feelings really do need outlets, and there is huge grief and anxiety and loss going on for people, and we can't handle this just by ourselves. So it's really important to find some person you can talk to, even if you have to go back and find a therapist or something like that.
Yeah, and even for those of us who live with our families, I have a wife and a young daughter and a puppy. It helps for my wife to have people outside of me to talk to. For me, outside, we talk to each other every day. Right. We talk to each other a lot. We've had a loss in the family recently, and we've had to work through that. In this kind of isolated environment, but for her to be able to reach out to friends has been so much better. And Calvin and I are here every week, but we're also on text throughout the week. And then we've got other people who my mother checks in every day. She gets to see the baby. We get to we're talking to people. I'm still working my day job as well, but we're still I'm probably checking with people more often now than we ever did before, and hopefully this keeps up.
A lot of people are saying they've noticed people come out of the woodwork and reach out to them that they didn't hear from regular before COVID.
Yep.
So let's keep that up. A lot of research also shows that if you do something to be helpful, to serve others, any kind of project, whether you're making stuff with your hands, putting that emotion of grief, loss, anxiety, uncertainty, what the hell is going on, all that crazy emotion, and channel it into good old-fashioned something, whether you're making cards, greeting cards, or beading, making your own homemade jewelry and beading stuff, or making face masks for your local providers, right? Or channel that crazy energy into purposeful, meaningful things. And that sounds so simple, but it can be really simple. It really can.
Yep.
And if you're doing it for somebody else or some group or some community reason, volunteering remotely in your community. I know people who are working on a hotline to call seniors at home at a senior center. There are things you can join up with, and channeling that frustrated energy is really, really, all the scientists say that's a great way to channel those emotions. So having people to talk to that are probably outside of the ones you're stuck at home with, having somebody, a good listener to talk to, even if you have to go back to a therapist, call 211 or some of the community service support lines, or go online, 211.org or unitedway.org. If you want to volunteer, get on volunteermatch.org. Those kinds of sites will help link you to community programs going on where you can get connected, whether it's for your own needs or to help other people. So doing things for others and feeling helpful makes us feel less helpless. Checking in with people gives us a really structured, normal, keeping things normal and structured, and checking in with people on a regular basis gives us some structure. There's some of the things most people are recommending right now. I would also say those long lost connections can be actually joyous to rediscover in your life right now. It's a great time to build your networks. See, if you think about building even online networks now, eventually they could be, when pandemic slows down, maybe an opportunity for new face-to-face. So this is a good chance to navigate and start building community even online. You never know, you might actually meet these people. So it's a really good time to build connection right now in spite of this.
That's true. All right. Val, thank you so much for being here and for spending a little over an hour with us. We'll have a link to the book and the show notes and everything, and to your website. Where do you hang out online? Where can people connect with you?
Well, I'm proud to say I blog for Psychology Today. I have a blog on there. It's similar to the title of my book, 400 Friends, but who do I call? That's the name of the blog. My book is 400 Friends and No One to Call. My book is certainly available also in an audio version on Audible. So on Amazon, you can get it Kindle, Audible, or the regular book on Amazon. And most outlets online, like Barnes & Noble and Books A Million, all those, as well as a lot of independent bookstores, if they're online, you can order the book. But I do hope people know that I write at least once a month for Psychology Today, and often it's a real topical. I wrote something related to COVID in March and getting ready for another one.
Well, thank you so much again, and we will let you know when this is up. Should be about, we're running about a week and a half out, so about 10 days out, and we'll shoot you a link when it's up so that you can share with your networks, and we appreciate you being here. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. I really enjoyed being with you guys. It's really comfortable being with you all. Thank you so much for the long conversation.
You're welcome.
Oh, thank you.
You have an awesome day.
You too.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for listening. Show notes and more at jkwdpodcast.com. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share with your friends, and we will see you next week. Bye!
A Better Humanhood production.